Marriage in the Middle Ages is a subject that continues to exert a profound fascination. It offers a privileged glimpse into a fundamental institution that has shaped society for centuries. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel if you like these videos and leave a like. Now let's start. Are you getting married tomorrow? Imagine instead that at 12 years old, your parents sold you to make a good business deal. No choice, no love. Your wedding night? A public spectacle. Yes, guests and relatives accompany you to bed and watch the rite. If you survive the birth, which is not a given, congratulations, you have a 50% chance that your husband won't beat you to death legally. Think dating is complicated today? In medieval Europe, your father could literally sell you before you could walk. Marriage was an economic and political transaction, and love had nothing to do with it. Your value, land, titles, inheritance. Take Margaret Beaufort. She was 6 years old when she was promised in marriage. At 12, she was already pregnant with Edmund Tudor, 24 years old. The birth damaged her body beyond repair. She never had any more children. Her story is just one of many. Isabella of Valois, for example, was married to the King of England at just 6 years old. In her wedding trousseau, dolls and miniature furniture. The noble marriage was a business contract, not an emotional choice. The minimum age to consummate was 12, but it was often not respected. The consummation had to take place in front of witnesses in an official manner. It was called bed ceremony. Family members and nobles attended, blessed the bed, and waited for proof of the union. Because without consummation, no marriage, and therefore no alliance, no heirs, no money. And what if pregnancy came? It was not a blessing, but Russian roulette. About 1 in 3 women died in childbirth or in the days following. Even noble women. Margaret gave birth at 13. Isabella of Aragon died at 18 after days of labor. Eleanor of Aquitaine survived 10 pregnancies, a miracle for the time. Women were forced to give birth until menopause or death. It was their duty. And if they didn't have children, they were considered a failure. Their bodies belonged to the dynasty, not to them. And if they survived marriage and childbirth, they had to live with men who had the legal right to beat them, imprison them, or even kill them. The law called for reasonable correction, as long as the cane was no thicker than the thumb. Henry VIII had 2 wives beheaded, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. The accusations, treason and adultery, often unfounded. No proof was needed. Suspicion was enough. Medieval marriage did not protect, it bound. And divorce? Almost impossible, easier to end up on the gallows. In the Middle Ages, marriage was not an act of love. It was a contract, a transaction, an often deadly trap for women. The Catholic Church tightly controlled the institution of marriage and granted annulments only in extremely specific cases. Proving that a marriage was invalid involved, for example, proving that it had not been consummated, a process that could include humiliating public examinations to verify the bride's virginity. Even if you succeeded, the legal process was lengthy, expensive, and beyond the reach of most people. Women, therefore, remained trapped in unions with men who had the legal right to beat them, rape them, and control them completely. A wife did not legally exist as an individual. She could not own anything, sign contracts, or testify without her husband's permission. If he chose to lock her in a tower, He was perfectly within his rights if he wanted to have her killed. A fabricated accusation of witchcraft, adultery, or treason would suffice. Medieval courts had no interest in due process, especially when a wife became inconvenient. Marriage was a total renunciation of all rights. But women had no alternative. Remaining unmarried meant poverty, isolation, social death. When Henry VIII had 2 wives beheaded, he was not breaking the law. He was using it. The system was designed to grant husbands absolute power, including that over life and death. And then there was the issue of dowries. Brides' families had to pay astronomical sums to get rid of their daughters. Legalized extortion. Some dowries were equivalent to hundreds of thousands of euros in today's money. Entire families went into debt for generations to ensure a proper marriage. And even after these sacrifices, no one guaranteed that the daughter would be treated with respect. Once married, everything, including the dowry, became the property of the husband. The woman went from being the property of the father to that of the husband. Inheritance laws made matters worse. If the husband died, the wife often lost everything. The wealth passed to a male relative. Widows without means were forced to remarry quickly or enter a convent to avoid starving. Some married 5 times, in the hope that their next husband would not leave them destitute. The more lucky women learned to use the system to their advantage, like Margaret Beaufort, who became one of the richest women in England. But they were exceptions. Marriage was a cruel and risky business. Even at its best, happiness was not guaranteed. In fact, it often didn't last long enough to leave room for trauma. Medieval marriages lasted an average of 15 to 20 years, not through divorce, but through death, childbirth, illness, war. Life was short, and love was not enough to save it. Remarriage was the norm. Survival depended on a new spouse. Widows and widowers married within weeks of a partner's death, not out of insensitivity, but out of necessity. Marriage was a revolving door. Emotional attachment was a dangerous luxury in a world where death was always around the corner. Despite everything, people continued to marry, to have children, to negotiate dowries, to endure public ceremonies that often marked the beginning of the end. Because for a medieval woman, even an unhappy marriage was safer than being alone. When in the Middle Ages, people promised each other, "Till death do us part," it wasn't a romantic phrase, it was the only way out. Death was the only possible divorce, and it often came sooner than one might have hoped. This was the reality of medieval marriage: girls sold like cattle, public wedding nights, husbands given a license to kill, families ruined by dowries, and brides reduced to bargaining chips. And now, excuse me if I take a moment to appreciate the fact that today I can choose who I go out with without my father having to negotiate a payment in jewelry. Because sometimes, to understand how lucky we are, we just have to look back and see where we came from. If this look into the dark side of medieval marriage has given you pause, share it with those who think dating today is a nightmare. Trust me, it could have been much, much worse. That's all for today. And what do you think about marriage in the Middle Ages? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new. See you next time. Bye.